Hello and welcome to the On the Couch podcast, the podcast that gives you the view from the therapist chair. I'm your host, John Dennis, a licensed professional counselor. You're listening to OTC episode 53 with Coral Sanchez of Coral Counseling. Welcome back, OTC listeners. Thank you for dropping by for the final episode of Season 2. And in this episode, I'm sharing a conversation that I have with Coral Sanchez. And Coral is a master's level clinician out in California. And she focuses a fair amount of her work with the Latina community as well as the first responder community, of which she is a part of both of those communities, and shared in our conversation just about her experiences growing up in those communities with family members as first responders, and then her own experiences, and then some of the challenges that a lot of first responders and members of the Latino community can face. And, you know, prior to 2020, this need for mental health services for both of these communities it's always been there. But especially in 2020, we've seen that increase exponentially. And especially the first responder community bearing a lot of the weight of, what we're experiencing with COVID and this pandemic. And I think a lot of times we are, most of the public is very unaware of what those burdens are, as well as just who does fall under that first responder umbrella. I think a lot of times we immediately think of, fire and rescue, EMS, law enforcement, things like that, and it really does go beyond that. And I think a lot of times we're unaware of the impact that doing that kind of work can have on a person, and unfortunately, facing negative stigmatism of mental health services from years past. I think a lot of first responders themselves are very unaware of the impact that their work can have on them and their loved ones. And that's why when I found out about Coral and the work that she's so passionate about, I knew I had to have her on the show. So I hope you take something from it, and I wish you happy holidays and a fast and happy end to 2020 and an amazing start to 2021. Well, I have here today on Couch Podcast Coral Sanchez, who professional clinical counselor in California. So thank you so much for being on the show, Coral.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. I was really stoked when I found out what you do. So I've been looking forward to with you. So yeah, like I said, thanks. So you work with some very niche populations. Can you kind of just give the overview of what you do with your counseling and how you came to that?
I primarily work with individuals that work in environments that have very high levels of stress that are work-related. So that can include managers that are in charge of, ensuring the employment of a lot of people. It can also include first responders. So first responders, a lot of people sometimes wonder what exactly that refers to, and it can refer to a variety of jobs. So you would imagine it involves law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, but this also includes people that are nurses, like at the ER, the doctors that are working there. All of these come together to work, and they deal with very stressful jobs because they have to make decisions in a split second, and those decisions are going to impact the treatment of so many people. And these are decisions that really take back. It can be very difficult. So knowing that you have a half a second to make a decision can put a lot on someone's shoulders. So that's what I work with in terms of first responders with the Latino community.
Yeah, in you and I communicating for this episode, I mean, I commented on, wow, just two very, I wouldn't say difficult populations, but I mean, obviously just such a huge, and at the same time, can be kind of difficult to get those two populations to come to counseling and to open up. How did you land on working with the Latino community and first responders?
Well, I myself am Latina. I'm first generation American, so I grew up in a Spanish speaking household. I didn't learn English until I actually elementary school. So for me, being able to provide services to the community that raised me is so important. But by the same token, I was also raised in a family of first responders. So my mother was a nurse back when, before she came over here. Unfortunately, the degrees didn't transfer. So instead, my mom raised us and my dad was working. But growing up, I was surrounded by people in the medical field. My family members ended up working. I grew up with law enforcement as well. My sister's is also working in law enforcement. And eventually, I ended up kind of working alongside law enforcement. I was a friend for 2.5 years. So during that time, I worked closely with law enforcement, and I came to see that it can be so difficult to access and to feel the ability to access mental health resources.
Yeah. So, forensic interviewer, can you kind of just unpack what is that?
Oh, that's a very good question. Uh-huh. So I was a forensic interviewer in Texas. Okay, so a lot of your viewers have probably seen something like CSI or SVU or TV shows like that, right? Mm-hmm. And in those TV shows, the victims of crime going to be adults. Sometimes a child is a victim or a witness to a crime. So that child has to be interviewed so that they can take down the information and try to move forward with whatever information can be provided. However, it can be very hard to speak to law enforcement because you have this person coming in uniform, probably a pretty tall person, and it can be intimidating. So it can be very difficult for children, especially younger children, because they aren't able to in the same way that an adult with a fully expanded vocabulary can. So that's where I came in. These children would be brought to me, and over the course of that forensic interview, I would try to gather as much information as I could, using developmentally appropriate questions, assessing their developmental level, so that we can try to get that information while minimizing the trauma inflicted on the child by having to discuss whatever it is that they may have witnessed or.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be a lot. I mean, speaking of high stress, yeah, I imagine that had to have been high stress for you also.
Absolutely. And there's so many great resources that are made available to victims of crime. So eventually, at the place where I worked, we were also able to provide therapy to these children so that they could move forward after these events happened. While I was working there, I saw that there wasn't really resources for the officers that were coming onto the scene and just looking at what was left after something had occurred. Asking these questions to the child, there was an officer or a detective or whoever was investigating it. Sometimes it was DCFS workers, Department of Children and Family Services. Mm-hmm. And they would also have to sit there and listen that this child was recounting. And we would go through the events like step by step as closely as we could, so that it's kind of like getting a child to describe something as though it's a movie, like sights, sounds, smells, everything. And so for people working in these jobs, investigating these crimes day in and day out, having to hear a story of the worst things, the worst moments of someone's life, it's pretty traumatic.
Yeah, I can imagine. So in terms of you've worked with a number of different populations. It can be very difficult to get them to open up, get them the services they need, specific to first responders and the Latino. Where do you think that comes from? Why do you think it's such a struggle?
With the Latino community, I think that, well, with all communities, actually, including people that are not necessarily law enforcement or firefighters, first responders, I think that there's this stigma in general that's still hanging around receiving mental health services. So there's this belief that if you have some kind of mental health concern, there must be something wrong with you. So even though we've done a lot of work to destigmatize it, there's still this belief. So we're starting to see that millennials will like joke around. You see all these like, oh, well, my therapist said. And so these are all ways that we're bringing this conversation out and about so that we can talk about these things. But there's still that little bit of stigma hanging around in the background.
Sure.
And so I think it's also a lack of access. So especially among the Latino community, you have people that are lacking resources. People who've come from other countries may not feel the ability to trust government or anything that they believe may be affiliated with some kind of government. So you also have this lack of knowledge of the resources. So in many Latin American countries, you don't necessarily have government resources being put towards mental health services. And so, for example, in the documentary Midnight Family by Luke Lawrenson, he mentions that in all of Mexico City, there are 40 ambulance rigs available to a city that has millions of people. And that's for general physical health services. So if that is the amount of help allocated towards physical health, resources allocated towards mental health are obviously are more likely than not going to be a lot less.
Sure. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Like you were saying, that idea of like 45, ambulance rigs sounds just insanely inadequate, to put it mildly. So yeah, like you said, I can only imagine much less for mental health end of things. And do you find there is more shift happening, like beyond the the millennials and memes and things like that, but like more resources and more programs to kind of fill that gap?
Absolutely. So in some local governmental areas, they're starting to put more resources into including mental health programs, physical health programs. They're increasing the amount of funding that's being put into health programs in general. And so this is trickling down into the families. You see that, especially with the Hispanic community, there's this idea of familismo, which basically a priority on family. So you take care of one another. But when there is so much distress being shown by a member and the family can't fix it, then the family is then willing to go seek help. Because these resources are made available and these families feel the need that, yes, there's somebody that needs this help, let's go get them the help. That overcomes the stigma. And so it's very similar to the growing we're seeing with the Me Too movement. As we're learning more about these things, people are wanting to take action. They're trying to be a part of the solution. In this case, they're trying to find solutions for these mental health concerns instead of placing blame or judgment on us. Like, instead of thinking there must be something wrong with them, more of a thought of, you know what, let's all work together and empower everyone to get help.
And do you find similar shift in the first responder community? Is it, I don't know, is it just lip service where, a lot of companies and jobs these days will talk about work-life balance, but it's sort of this talking about work-life balance, but it's not actually a thing you can do. Do you find there's a shift within the first responder community where mental health services are becoming more accepted and sought out?
So different agencies are implementing different programs to assist their employees. So, like, for instance, LAPD has created a system in-house therapists so that individuals that are working within LAPD can go seek mental health services within, with somebody that's actually being put in their building. Pflugerville, which is in Texas, there's this mental health resilience annual check for each employee, which, if I was nervous about getting a physical, I imagine I would also be nervous about getting a mental health resilience annual check, and it's quite a mouthful.
Yes.
but they're starting to bring in resources. There's a suicide prevention program. They're also creating peer programs where veteran law enforcement personnel are able to go in and work with other people. They can talk about the things that are going on among them, knowing that they're going to be understood, knowing that these are other people who've had similar experiences. And so Pflugerville is also your podcast. They created this suicide podcast that is done by police department staff. So they're implementing programs in order to try to create a net underneath, in order to trauma and stigma, or the trauma associated with the line of work and the stigma associated with seeking mental health services when you are in this line of work. Mm-hmm.
It's so cool to hear about these different things because, obviously, military has gotten a lot of focus for, PTSD and trauma and, secondary PTSD and compassion fatigue and things like that. And I feel like there has a trickle-down effect where, it's still lagging. It's still a little bit late. It's not going to all roll out at the same time, and everybody's going to jump on board with accessing mental health and accepting mental health services. But post 9/11, there has been more focus put for first responders, and I'm so glad that you kind of explained. That's not just law enforcement, fire department. That jumped to mind right away, but even like you were saying, the doctors, the nurses. One of the ones that I'm familiar with a little bit, just in terms of colleagues, has been the call centers, the people who are fielding the calls for fire, rescue, all of that, 911, because they have to hear all of it, and they're somewhat powerless to do anything, direct them through the steps.
Absolutely. And they don't hang up until somebody has arrived. And during that time, they're sitting there with the person, this fear in the pit of their stomach. And you're absolutely right. It can feel very powerless to just sit there and only be able to listen, but not be able to see what's happening.
So, Coral, do you have any stats that you're aware of in terms of mental health community and what they deal with?
Absolutely. So Approximately 30% of first responders develop behavioral health conditions. So it's a big number, but not all first responders develop a behavioral health condition. And this is important to look at because when you look at the general population, you see that 20% of the general population have health conditions. So that's a 10% increase. And 85% of first responders have experienced traumatic events on the job. Now, experiencing a traumatic event on the job does not necessarily mean you're going to, develop PTSD, but it is something that's heavy on you. And in addition to that, 69% of first responders have experienced a lack of sleep. 46% have experienced anxiety. 46% have experienced anxiety, not 46 in total.
Yes, it's a very low number. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And 27% of first responders have formally been diagnosed with depression.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean the lack of sleep. I mean that's 70% essentially, and the 85% with experiencing traumatic events on the job. I mean, obviously those are pretty high numbers, so you can see where the impact that would have on those mental or behavioral health conditions. Sure.
So I think that all these numbers not know them off the top of your head, but to be aware of these numbers because this shows why you have such high rates of things like suicide, because if you experience all these things, don't get the help that is necessary in order to be able to move forward in a healthy manner, you're going to be sitting with this. And when you sit with this, it doesn't just stay in the office. It doesn't just stay in one building. It follows you home. It follows you to your relationships. It follows you on your weekend. It follows you to retirement. So don't let it follow you. Don't let it stick around.
Yeah, that's such an important concept of like that idea of it following you. I know a lot of people assume incorrectly that it doesn't follow you, that they can just like take it off, just like taking off their equipment or taking off their firearm or things like that, and just, oh yeah, I'll just put down the anxiety but it obviously it doesn't work like that. In terms of the counseling that you do, how do you try to help? What do you try to put in place? Can you that?
Absolutely. So, when you first start doing counseling with individuals in this field, something that's a little bit more work is building rapport. You want this person to trust you, but you're working with a population that has seen the absolute worst that people can offer on a regular basis. So it takes more to get them. And that's fair. You don't trust the first stranger off the street, right?
Sure.
So it takes a little bit more work building that trust, but it's so worth it once you do. And one of the things that we work on is definitely relaxation techniques. So that can involve breathing techniques, which work for some people, but not so much for others. So especially if you're somebody who has a service weapon, are trained how to breathe properly when you are using that weapon. So for some people, it can be triggering to do breathing techniques. And so you have to find something different. Whereas for other people, they kind of already, it's weird to talk to people about like teaching them breathing techniques, because a lot of people are like, ma'am, I've been breathing since I was born. It was literally the first thing I did.
Yep.
So, kind of explaining, well, yes, we're going to be have this skill. You're able to breathe. Now let's use that same skill in a different way so that you can use that to help relax during these intense moments that you're facing.
I'm glad you brought up the service weapon and shooting training. I'm familiar with that from personal life and hunting and things like that. And yeah, until you just said it just now, I never even thought about for that being triggering because of the, training it in another way for another use. So when people are coming in, are you finding that they're being sent to you or by, a spouse or a loved one, or are they coming in on their own, or yeah?
That is really good. A lot of people end up being brought in by a loved one. And the people who do come usually come for couples counseling. So there are some people who will say, you know what, I think we need couples counseling. Mm-hmm. And once they're in the room, sitting on the chair, they're like, oh, maybe it's not couples counseling. I want to work on improving myself. And that's fine. And by the same token, some people get brought in by their significant other saying, you know what, we need to work on this. We would like to improve here, and so let's go and work on that. And then that's when they come in and eventually also decide, you know what, maybe I do kind of like this. I like spending a little time, talking and getting these things out from inside of me.
Mm-hmm. And specific to community, I think that negative stigma has definitely been there. I think it's stereotyped a little bit. But what do you see? I mean, do you see a lot of the you need to just kind of, you don't need to talk about it or don't talk about it because they'll take your job away or, things like that?
I see a lot of people who are just like, oh yeah, just rub some dirt on it, walk it off. And, these are things that when you are the person that people call in the most terrifying moments of their lives, if you are the one asking for help, maybe you're not fit to do your job. Maybe you're not up to par and you can't be on the line of duty anymore. Mm. And a lot of people think that, oh, if I go to therapy, then it must mean that. The reality of it is that, we need to keep you at your best. You're coming in, making these split-second decisions that I described earlier, but we need to keep you at your best so that you are making these decisions, think through and reason, and have a response instead of just reacting. Oh, no, yeah. And you're absolutely people do fear that they're going to lose their job. There was a study done that showed that 39% of first responders say that they would face negative consequences if they services at work. Mm-hmm. Of those 39%, 55% were saying that their supervisors would treat them differently for bringing up mental health concerns. 45% of them were saying that their peers would think of them as weak if they brought up mental health. Mm-hmm. And 34% were saying that mental health concerns would cause them to be overlooked for promotions. So instead, a lot of people believe that it would have an awful impact on their career. And what it boils down to is that 4 out of 10 first responders do not want to seek help because they think that the stigma associated with seeking help is going to crush their career.
Mm-hmm. And from the military community, you have a lot of people that they'll pay out of pocket because they don't want it on record. They don't want it on their insurance because of some of the security clearance and some of the promotion stuff and some of the things that you. And I've worked with some first responders that were higher up the chain of command themselves, like a couple of chiefs or things like that. That they were like, I can't have anybody knowing that I'm here right now. Look at me differently. They won't trust me. They won't listen to me.
Absolutely. So many people report those thoughts, and that's why it's so important to emphasize these services are we have confidentiality and we will hold it.
Well, and to be honest, I mean, even, you and I setting up for this, I mean, there was some concern, some reservation over, okay, what are we going to be talking about? The respect within that community, the people in the first responder and the Latino community, coming to you need to know the respect is there, the knowledge is there that you've lived this, you've experienced it yourself and things like that, but also that it's going to be safe to talk to you. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. When people, one of the things that I emphasize greatly, like, in addition to, I understand what you're going through. I've lived with people that have done this line of work. I've lived this lifestyle. It's personal experience in addition to, going through the formal education. But I'm also going to, you have a right to privacy, and I'm going to maintain it.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of building trust, do you find having to share some of that with them, get through some of that thick outer shell at the beginning?
Yes, because people don't want to sit there and have to explain to me, look, this is what I do. So a big thing that I've seen with some individuals seeking services from me is that a lot of times they'll go to a therapist and this person will talk to them, but they feel like they're being seen for their job, not necessarily as a person. So it's letting them know, I get this. I totally understand. I'm not going to make you have to describe your day-to-day job duties. Already know. Like, let's just talk about you as a person, not you as a job, not you as a badge.
Yeah. I keep thinking of, I tell pretty much everybody in my clients and people that know me know that, like, the way my brain works is sort of in like movie and TV scenes and music quotes and book quotes. And I just always keep thinking of in the first season with Dennis Leary, the therapist comes to the fire station and he sort of takes it upon himself to try to run her out the door. And like, nobody else wants to talk to her, and he sticks around to like try to scare the crap out of her with like, have you ever seen this happen? Have you ever seen this happen? And like, we don't need you here, sort of mentality. So yeah, I can see where it's a very thick outer shell sometimes.
Absolutely, but it's so worth it when you do, not especially for the people that are sitting on your couch, because if going through this, having to sit with that stress is consuming so much of their energy. And so once you're able to go through the therapeutic process with them and see that weight taken off of their shoulders, it's amazing.
Well, and I think also what you were talking about before with helping some of them with those family relationships or things like that, of, look, to help you with some of those things, that stuff the one won't impact the other, as much. The work won't impact the relationships or vice versa. And yeah, you will be operating closer to 100%, I guess I would say.
Absolutely. And when you're working with their families, you can see the toll that's lifted off of, because with some family members, you might see, these feelings of guilt. They want to spend time with their loved ones, but they're terrified because they don't know if their loved one is going to be coming home at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. You and I, and we know that we're going to be going home.
Yeah.
In some of these jobs, you don't necessarily have that guarantee. And so the family members a lot of times experience this feeling They don't want their loved one to go to work, sorry. They don't want them to go to work because they don't know if they're going to come home at the end of the day. But
Sure.
you can't tell them not to go to work because it's part of who they are. They chose that job for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And this person for that same reason because of who they are. So there's these conflicting emotions, and being able to work with them on that so that they can enjoy their relationship to the max. I'm honored to be able to work with these families.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I was thinking, just the idea of like first responders, military service, things like that. Yeah, I mean, people who are amazingly brave do such a vital service day in and day out. And yeah, people say all the time about firefighters and law enforcement. That idea of everybody, their instinct is to run away from the danger or the fire or the whatever it might be, and these people obviously do the opposite. And just the amount of respect and sort of sacred it must be to sit with them and hear their stories and help them walk through some of those struggles has got to be just unreal.
Yeah, and let them know that for that period of time, they don't have to be carrying my troubles. They don't have to be carrying the troubles of everyone around them. That I will carry those troubles that they're carrying with them, so that even for that brief period of time, and slowly they start implementing it more and more outside of the therapy room. But you can see the energy levels rise in them once they're going through the therapeutic process.
Mm-hmm. And do you also find you work with a number of the loved ones and family members in individual counseling as well? I know military spouses, military family, they need services. They're along for the ride, but they're dealing with it, just like you said. So I would imagine the need is also there.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about and things like that, and for children too. They worry about their parent coming home, but they also, when their parents are home, sometimes, especially like as a parent, if you're stressed, you go home, you might not want to go inside with your child. You're going to be thinking about other things, and so for kids, it's also difficult just carrying that weight. Like, why does my parent not have the energy to engage with me like other children?
Yeah, and even the kids become teenagers. Obviously, that can be pretty challenging, and the parenting and the family relationships can get pretty strained. And okay. So, in terms of methods, what do you find works best? And
So one of the things that I do with individuals who work with me is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. I also employ guided imagery.
I always say, I just think our world, not just our country, but our world, so uneducated about how big a deal trauma is. That even things that we don't think are traumatic can leave an imprint. So you're doing the trauma-focused CBT.
Having experienced trauma in the past and finding a solution for that past trauma is not going to make you invincible. Be moving forward with your life, and as life happens, things continue to happen. You might end up getting into a car accident afterwards. And so these trauma, some people might feel the impact of trauma from that event. Some people might not. As you go through life, you're going to continue to have events that are going to be traumatic or not. we can't guarantee that you're not going to experience trauma in the future.
Sure.
So it's good to have the tools to handle it when it does happen.
Now, you also mentioned support groups being a benefit. On my end, I'm always like, there's never enough support groups. I'm always looking around for like somebody should start something for this. Same way where you're at, of like there's just not enough support groups, but there are some out there. Or,
I think that support groups, there's not enough, and they can, especially when you feel that I'm the only person that's dealing with this. When you go to a support group, there's going to be other people that are going to be there that have been through a similar experience. And it might not be exactly the same, but they're there to support you, not to emphasize the stigma, not to, make you feel bad or guilt trip you, but they're there to help empower you and to together move forward.
I always find it so unfortunate that sort of those cognitive distortions and what people experience with anxiety almost like perfectly block them from going to support groups. I always say, support group, like if I struggle with anxiety to get over the like being in front of other people and talking to multiple people or being in a group setting, they would benefit so much. But so often they're like, nope, it is bad enough. I don't want to go to group counseling.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times with time, it takes a little bit of time, but I've seen a lot of individuals like did that first time. Well, initially when the idea is initially brought up, I have a lot of reluctance, but as we go through therapy and they're like, oh, this isn't so bad. This isn't nearly as awful.
What was I afraid of? Yeah.
Exactly.
So kind of moving into if you are a coworker or you are a family member of a first responder and you think that, they are struggling, that's, marriage or relationships or, actual PTSD, what are things they can do to help? You're listening to OTC episode 53 with Coral Sanchez of Coral Counseling. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
Would you like to talk to a counselor but can't find the time? Would you rather talk to someone from the comfort of your own home? If so, Parenting and Family Solutions is here to help. We now offer teletherapy to all clients who reside in the state of Pennsylvania. Using our secure portal, you can have a video session with your counselor using a laptop, desktop computer, or smartphone. Visit our website to learn more at www.parentfamilysolutions.com or give us a call at 717-602-5560 to see if teletherapy might be a good fit for you. Let us help you build a stronger family and a healthier you.
If you are a coworker or you are a family member of a first responder and you think that, they are struggling in some way, whether that's, marriage or relationship, actual PTSD, what are things they can do to help?
Well, chances are if you're listening to this podcast, if you're there, you're already doing it. You're providing non-judgmental support. You're trying to see what are the options available. You're already doing all these things in order to improve their self-care, and introducing the idea of therapy is a big step. And chances are you might also face quite a bit of reluctance and feet dragging, but all of those things are ways in which you're already supporting them. but at the same time, not putting your self-care back burner.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's pretty important too. Yeah. Thank you. For any, either budding or already clinician out there that want to work with this population, I think sometimes there's that fear of like, oh, well, I have to have had this, similar experiences to what you've had of like growing up in the first responder community or in order to work with this population. Do you find that to be true?
I think that a lot of people can be intimidated by, the level of stress that's involved with this, not already being a part of it. But I think it's so worth it if you find a way in, because while it does help that I have this personal experience, because it helps me to understand certain things, the mentality behind a lot of behavior. And it is easier to trust someone who you associate with a group that you're a part of. You don't necessarily have to be affiliated with the first responder community in order to work with them, especially in areas where you have smaller communities. The amount of therapists in that area is not going to be a very big number. There's not going to be a lot of options. And the thing is, these first responders are still experiencing day-to-day work. So they still need somebody to talk to. And if you can make yourself available, that's amazing.
Yeah.
People don't want to have to be driving, 3 counties down in order to they want someone that's going to be close, someone that they can go see and not have to make a whole day trip out of.
Sure. And I think similar to the, seems like and Dan Siegel have both hit on the that concept of, just show up. Like even just being there is huge. And I can speak from my own personal experience professionally. Working with first responders a little bit here and there and military community. I don't have a background in those. I have some knowledge of military just from having family members. But, I always say like just enough knowledge to be dangerous kind of idea. But I think as long as a clinician approaches it with respect and is open about that and open to learning about that, can go a long way. That kind of helps with building the trust and the therapeutic rapport and things like that.
Absolutely. None of us are born experts. We have to work towards getting there. And I think that, people can do the work to educate ourselves and make sure that we're able to provide the best possible service.
Sure. So in terms of gaps in services, a lot of times I'll ask the question, if you were like, I don't know, at the federal government level, you're in charge of all of mental health services for the first responder and the Latino community. What are the gaps that need to be filled? What are programs and services that need to be created?
So, John Stewart did a lot of work in making sure that medical care for first responders continue to get the services that they need, because we've seen that there are higher rates of chronic illness that have been seen in the first responders that responded that day. When we needed help, the towers were crumbling, everybody was staring at their TVs in shock. These people went in, they did what had to be done to try to rescue as many people, to try to minimize the damage, and they're experiencing all kinds of. So now, just getting the medical help for them is so difficult. So I think that we definitely need to do more work in ensuring that there are government programs that are put into place to protect these people that are doing everything they can to protect us on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. And similar to the 45 ambulance rigs, that idea that there's even needs to be done on the mental health side?
Absolutely. Usually, medical health it is very important, and a lot of times, that can contribute to mental health concerns. We need to make sure that we're putting resources into both of these concerns so that people can receive top-notch medical care that's going to keep them physically healthy, but also incredible mental health care so that they're doing well both mentally and physically.
Okay. And if you had the megaphone that could project to every first responder, to them, what advice would you give them in terms of mental health services?
In the same way that you work out to stay fit, going to therapy, talking to someone, that can be a great way to stay mentally fit. Going to therapy does not mean that there is something wrong. It can be a great way of keeping yourself work as close as you can to working at 100.
And so would you recommend to general public or work in those communities to go on ride-alongs to familiarize themselves?
Absolutely. It's definitely a way to get to know the population a lot better and to experience for yourself. Many days it can pretty much be have you ever heard the phrase hurry up and wait?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's very popular in the military.
Oh, absolutely. And in the law enforcement community as well. There are instances where you're kind of bored sitting around, trying to figure out what to do next. Maybe you want to figure out what to have for lunch. And then all of a sudden a call comes in and you have to go and respond immediately. You have to go assess the situation and all of that. And your lunch plans just went out the window, especially Friday night. Friday and Saturdays, that is the best time to do a ride along because that's when you're going to get a very clear picture of what it's like. That where all of a sudden your blood is pumping, you're full of energy. And then once it's over, but your shift continues, you're tired. You're exhausted from that adrenaline rush, but you still need to be there and present because if another call, you don't. Again. Exactly.
Well, and I'd like to throw in, just from my own experience working with law enforcement and first responders in fire, I'm trying to think. I think it's pretty much just those two communities. I don't believe I've worked with some nurses, some doctors, not so much. I have a couple of EMTs I've worked with. I take that back. But on my end, as like to throw out there that in my practice, I completely understand that stuff goes sideways. And, you may have an appointment scheduled at, 2:00, but stuff happens. On my end, I'm flexible and understanding of that if it's job related, go do that. Go save people, please. We'll figure out rescheduling your appointment. That's not a huge deal.
Absolutely. And especially with this, you see that a lot of times their schedules can change, emergencies come up and you have to, and it's good to be able to be available because that can also know that support is going to be there regardless if, they're always going to have someone that they can count on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, just with serving warrants or on stakeouts or, getting a fire call last minute or things like that. Like we said, I mean, stuff happens. So it's the nature of what they're doing for a living.
And once you respond, you're not just going to walk away and be like, oh, I'm sorry, my shift is over. No, you're going to do what you can. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times you're not going to be leaving at exactly a certain time.
Yeah. So for you, Coral, over the next year, are there, irons that you have, things things that you're working on project-wise, or what do you got your hand in?
Well, right now, I'm excited because I'm trying to expand the amount of I'm trying to expand that I currently have available, not just to first responders, their families as well. Because, it can be things like support groups for family members, not just providing individual therapy. So I'm seeing what others add to my plate to ensure that I'm giving a well-rounded service, and reaching out to more agencies, being able to provide information about things like not just mental health services for individuals, but for couples as well. And because a lot of times police officers that are responding to calls, for example, like a domestic violence type situation, explaining that can be traumatic because you don't know what you're going to walk into, things like that. And that's something that they have to do every day. So reminding them, there's people that are dealing with their stuff, but they're go in during those moments. So reminding them that, they still need to take care of themselves during all of this. So making sure that all the agencies in my area are aware that seeking mental health is not a bad thing.
I think so often there is that almost on the other end of the spectrum is this assumption that everybody has PTSD, that, everyone in the first responder has PTSD or these like over-diagnosed terms that we throw out there. And that I don't find that to be true. I don't know if you do. Not every first responder has PTSD.
Yeah, no, not all of them do. And you're absolutely right. Not all of them do. But I think that one of the things that they don't necessarily consider that comes as a shock, they think, oh, well, once I retire, this is going to go away. And for those of them that do have PTSD, it doesn't go away. So you still see high levels of suicide rates among retired cops because memories don't just disappear when they retire.
Oh, so glad you said that. That's huge. Because, obviously, you and I are aware. Anybody listening, I always recommend The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk to learn about the impact of trauma. And that concept, that happened, X number of years ago. I shouldn't still be dealing with this. Or I could definitely see where suicides among the retired first responder community, some of just like, what's my purpose now? I used to be very important and save people's lives and provide a very valuable service to the community. And now that I'm retired, I'm not. So now what? Where do people find you? How do they get a hold of you?
My physical address is at 5020 Campus Drive in Newport Beach. I can also be reached through my website, which is coral-counseling. And I can also be reached via phone at 714-683-4237. And all of that information is also listed on my website.
And the needs or the Latino community. You're definitely welcome anytime. So thank you. Take care.
Absolutely. Likewise.
So there you have it, OTC listeners. Season 2 is officially wrapped up. If you've stopped by for any part of Season 1 or Season 2, I really can't thank you enough. The listeners for this project make it so worthwhile, and I've really enjoyed connecting with you all over the last 2 seasons and getting to hear how the show has impacted you and how the guests have made a difference in your lives. So I'm so stoked for season 3 and who I get to talk to and the episodes that I get to share with you all. I wish you all a happy holidays. I wish you an amazing end to 2020, and I hope you all are safe and healthy, and I wish you a very prosperous and just an amazing start to 2021. I will catch you all in the new year, and I hope you'll join me again for season 3. Take care. Well, if you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're catching this podcast. You can check out detailed show notes and any other resources given in the show at www.pfsonthecouch.com. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming episodes, guests, or contribute questions to the show, be sure to follow along on any of your favorite social media platforms. The author and host of this podcast is not engaged in a therapeutic relationship with the listener and cannot give counseling advice without a confidential appointment. Listeners should be sure to consult with a licensed therapist in their area or seek emergency medical attention if they are experiencing psychological difficulty. A special thanks to the band The Topsy-Turvies for the show theme song. Their song, Like a Living Dead, can be found at topsyturvies.bandcamp.com. The bump interview track was the song 1973 by Bruno E. The author and host of this podcast is John Dennis. Special thanks to show editor Casey Lehman and show producer Trevor Groff.